and sit down.
Hello again, Champagne Dreamers, and welcome back to another utterly fabulous episode of JANESSA After Dark. I am so glad to have you back joining me for Season 2 of JANESSA After Dark. Of course, we kicked it off with Episode 1, featuring an interview with Heidi Moore, an independent horror filmmaker with Wretched Productions. And in this episode, we have yet another fabulous indie horror filmmaker that we're going to be talking to and spilling some tea with. But before we get to that, I want to talk just a little bit about the horror genre and why it is that so many queer folks seem drawn to the dark side. Growing up as a little baby queer in Bowbells, North Dakota, I absolutely loved scary stuff. I loved Halloween. I loved all the images of the classic Universal Studios monsters. Frankenstein, Dracula, the werewolf, the mummy, the Bride of Frankenstein, the creature from the Black Lagoon, and the Phantom of the Opera. They were all creepy and scary, but so alluring. There was something about being in that state of just a little bit of fear that I always loved. Halloween was my favorite holiday early on. I loved picking out costumes, even though the selections were pretty terrible in the 1980s. A lot of times it was some sort of vinyl smock that had something printed on it with a cheap plastic mask with a little elastic string that would go around the back of your head with 2 eye holes and a tiny little mouth hole cut out. I loved decorating for Halloween. I loved putting up those cardboard pictures of witches and skeletons and vampires and bats and jack-o'-lanterns. I loved Halloween. Every night before I would go to bed, my mom would always read a story to me. And when we would look in the bookstores, I would always try to find ones that had some sort of scary element. I remember there was this one book that had something to do with mummies and this kid with a little mummy figurine and it came to life. And I loved mysteries like Nancy Drew and Trixie Belden and the Bobbsey twins. Strangely enough, I didn't get into the Hardy Boys until much later, when the Hardy Boys involved 2 sexy wrestlers in Speedos. But I loved anything that gave me a little bit of a chill. Now, even before I started watching horror movies, my mom and I used to watch Dark Shadows on PBS, and that really sort of set the stage for my eventual love of horror. As a kid, it was the perfect mix of supernatural elements, vampires and witches and werewolves, but it was toned down by the lack of gore effects and the mixture of the horror supernatural elements with the more soap opera themed storylines. I was absolutely obsessed with Laura Parker's Angelique. Those big luminous blue eyes that look like they could just see right through you. She was such a glamorous and terrifying and wonderful character. And she is certainly one of the early influences that eventually became part of my drag persona. Now, even though I was always drawn to horror, it doesn't mean that I always enjoyed it. It took me a little while to kind of dip my toes in and get used to the genre. My mom had a friend with 2 sons, Danny and Dwayne, and when I would go to their house, they would often want to watch horror movies. We were about the same age, but they had much more exposure to the genre, and they seemed to take to it automatically, whereas I was a little bit squeamish. I remember we were watching Stephen King's Silver Bullet, and the scene where the werewolf came through the window and ripped the woman's nightgown absolutely terrified me. I had nightmares for several days after that. I also remember that my brother had rented Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. I don't know if it was just for a sleepover or for his birthday party, but I remember putting that tape into our VCR, and he hadn't rewound the tape, and it happened to load up at the very end, where you see the popsicle stick house and you see the light come on. There was something so creepy about that it freaked me out, and I couldn't bring myself to actually watch the movie. Now, a couple of years later, I would watch that movie and actually really love it. There's something about that particular movie that really resonated with me as a young queer. As with a lot of the typical slasher movies at the time, you had this group of teenagers who were all being targeted by some mysterious killer who was isolating them and killing them one by one. But unlike a lot of the other slashers at the time, this group decided to support each other. They decided to work together to try to take out the threat. Rather than just wandering around oblivious and being picked off one by one, they came together and they tried to increase their skills and abilities by working together as a team. That film in particular is much different from other entries in the franchise, as well as other slashers from the same time. Rather than featuring one outsider who would turn out to be the final girl, this film was a group of outsiders, and they were all working together. They had found their community, their support system. And that was really important for me to see as part of my identity development. Now, the first time that I remember actually just watching a horror movie all the way through and enjoying it and not having nightmares afterwards was when my mom brought home Prom Night 2, Hello, Mary Lou. That film had a unique and interesting blend of slasher tropes along with supernatural elements. I loved that film and the way that it put those different types of subgenres of horror together. And that combination of slasher and supernatural is actually part of why I really enjoyed one of the films by my interview guest for this episode. But we'll get to that a little bit later. Now, in addition to Nightmare on Elm Street 3 and Prom Night 2, there's another film that I watched while I was in high school that's a big part of my appreciation for horror and has really stuck with me in many ways throughout the years, and that film is Sleepaway Camp. When I was researching slasher films for my master's thesis, I was really surprised to find that a lot of authors who had written about gender and sexuality in horror films hadn't really written about Sleepaway Camp. And if they had, they generally dismissed it as a ripoff of Friday the 13th. A teenagers go off to summer camp and get killed type of slasher. And while it is that summer camp slasher film, it also has a very complex and layered presentation of both sexuality and gender. I'm actually planning to do a more thorough breakdown of the gender and sexuality politics found in Sleepaway Camp in a future episode of this podcast. But basically, the film presents two cousins, Ricky and Angela, who go off to camp. Angela is shy and reclusive, and Ricky is her hot-headed protector. Anyone that teases or causes trouble for Angela winds up dead. Of course, Ricky is set up as the red herring in the film. They want you to believe that he can't control his temper and he's taking revenge on those who would torment his cousin. It's a pretty flimsy plot device, and I think most people see through it. Most people figure out that the killer is Angela. What they don't necessarily figure out is the reason why she's killing these people. Now, the film starts off by showing two young children, Peter and Angela, a few years before the main events of the film happen. Peter and Angela are playing in the water with their father, and there's a boating accident. We see their father laying face down in the water. We see one of the children splashing, crying for help, and then we see a bloody life preserver rising to the surface. We know that there's only one survivor of this boating accident. Cut to a few years later, and Ricky and Angela are headed off to camp. So of course we assume that Angela is the child who survived the boating accident. Now, if you look closely at who is targeted in the film, it's not just people who tease or torment Angela, but they are people who specifically remind Angela about her body and about her sexuality. There's the camp cook who corners her in the walk-in cooler and threatens to molest her. There's an older boy who throws water balloons at Angela, hitting her in the chest and exposing her lack of breasts. And there are the popular girls that try to throw Angela into the lake when she doesn't want to go swimming. Now, at the end of the film, we find out why Angela is so uncomfortable with her body. In a flashback scene, we see Aunt Martha, Ricky's mother and Angela's guardian, as she's taking in the child who survived the boating accident, where it's revealed that it was actually Peter who survived. Now, because Aunt Martha already has a boy in the house, she decides to force Peter to live as Angela. Angela is living a lie, and anyone or anything that threatens to expose that lie becomes a target of her rage. And the final reveal of the film, Angela standing nude on the beach, covered in blood and revealing her penis, is one of the most shocking and surprising scenes that I've ever found in a slasher movie. Now, at this point, you're probably asking yourself, what does all of this have to do with why queers are drawn to the horror genre? And I think it has a lot to do with why a lot of people are drawn to horror. A lot of the people that I know and have met who really enjoy horror have at different points in their lives really felt like outsiders. They didn't feel like they belonged in their high schools, in their communities, sometimes in their own families. And that's something that queer people know especially well. Being queer is something that stretches across economic lines, across racial lines, and unlike someone who belongs to a racial or ethnic minority, where you can at least assume that someone in the family has the same identity that they have, queer people are often isolated even within their own families. It's an invisible identity. something that doesn't automatically announce itself, something that we as queer folks always find ourselves to be confessing over and over again through the coming out process. And that's why, at least for me, the 3 films that I talked about earlier really resonated for me and my particular experience of queerness. In Prom Night 2, the main character, Vicky Carpenter, becomes possessed by the spirit of Mary Lou Maloney. She has something inside that she's afraid of, but that makes her feel powerful. And whether intended or not, this is actually a great metaphor for queerness. As young people discover this identity, this collection of feelings and attractions, it can be very frightening, but as they grow to embrace it, it can feel very powerful, even though there's often this feeling that that power is somehow forbidden. That kind of message is exactly what I was looking for as I was going through my identity development. And to this day, there is something about queerness that feels both empowering and forbidden. It's something that's wonderful, but also dangerous. What was most meaningful for me about Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, is that it wasn't about a single outsider. It was about a group of outsiders who found a community. Discovering your queerness, especially in a place like Bow Bells, North Dakota, can be extremely lonely. It's easy to feel like you're the only person out there who has your feelings or your experiences or who's on the journey that you're on. In Dream Warriors, all of these individual kids are having the same problem. They're all tormented by the same thing. And they come together and they make each other stronger by creating a community. That was such a powerful message to me as I was watching it, and it was so much different than the other slasher films of the time. Usually, it's a group of kids, mostly popular kids with a couple of outsiders on the fringe, and they just sort of go about their lives and they get killed off one by one. Now that's actually another reason why queers are often drawn to horror, is there's a sort of revenge fantasy about it, in seeing all of these popular kids killed off and seeing the outsider left behind at the end. Anyone who has felt like an outsider, who feels like they've been targeted by those popular kids, by the people who represent whatever's normal and mainstream and considered acceptable by society, can find a sort of catharsis by seeing the person who is outside, seeing the person who's at the margin be successful in the end. And it's usually the outsider who's left at the end, the final girl, the survivor. And it's her differentness, it's her outsider status that protects her, which in and of itself is a great message to those outsiders, but it can also be an isolating message. There's a reason why she's called the final girl. She's usually the only one left at the end of all the carnage. In Nightmare on Elm Street 3, it's a group of outsiders coming together, and even though they don't all survive, they're able to help and support each other get through what it is that they're facing. That was so empowering to me. I didn't understand that there could be a whole community of people who were like me. It wasn't until I got to college and came out that I started to look around and find other people who had the same sort of identity and had similar experiences that we could talk about and work through. And through that community, we did indeed become stronger. And finally, there's Sleepaway Camp. That movie was powerful for me because it showed me how deeply the horror genre could explore issues of sexuality and gender. If you really look and explore the horror genre, there's a lot of weird gender going on. There's a lot of crazy sexuality that hasn't been fully explored. Ever since Norman Bates put on his mother's dress and that ratty old wig, there's been a sense of subversion of gender expectations, of sexuality that comes up in the horror genre, especially in slasher films. And Sleepaway Camp has probably some of the most actually complex dynamics around gender and sexuality that I've encountered in a slasher film. There's a frame story about Peter and Angela's father. He's shown to have a male partner, and their scenes together are actually very tender and very loving, which is quite strange considering that this film came out in 1983. And we also have to take into account that these loving, tender scenes are happening within the context of this larger world of death and destruction. And so the film's gender and sexuality politics are very hard to pin down. I've been wrestling with it for almost 30 years. A large part of my master's thesis was based around that film alone. And I'm still trying to figure out exactly what I think about that film and what I think it's trying to say. And I love that a horror film can give me that much to wrestle with, that much to grapple with when it comes to sexuality and gender. I love that this genre allows for things to just get weird. And through that weirdness, we can do some real exploring and experimenting. And what would it look like if things were like this or like that? In short, I think that horror is appealing to outsiders and queer folks because it presents a world that we know all too well. A world where everything isn't always all right, where there are threats in the darkness. There are forces that are looking to harm you. Whether that's the pastor down the street who says that you're going to hell, or the well-meaning family member who refuses to recognize your partner, or the government refusing to provide federal protections for your employment and safety because of your sexual identity or your gender identity. Queer folks understand that the world is not always pleasant, that the threats are very real, and that often, if they're going to be overcome, they're going to be overcome by us alone. Unless we can find a community that wants to grapple with ideas, a community that wants to explore this dangerous and fabulous and mysterious thing inside ourselves, a community that can help get us through until the credits roll. All right, my guest for this episode is an independent horror filmmaker who's made films like Generation Axe, The Cabin, Crinoline Head, Dollface, and Family Possessions. He's worked with horror icons like Felissa Rose from Sleepaway Camp and Mark Patton from Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and he's also the founder and director of the Crimson Screen Horror Festival in Charleston, South Carolina. Recently inducted into the Days of the Dead Hall of Fame at the first ever convention in Charlotte, North Carolina, he's not only a creator, but also a supporter of other independent filmmakers. Please enjoy my interview with Horse Creek Productions' own Tommy Faircloth. Well, hello, Tommy Faircloth. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I am good. Tell me just a little bit more about you. Tell me a little bit about who you are.
About me? Well, what do you want to know? Is this like a Grindr phone call?
Yes. This is going to be on grinderfails.com.
Well, like, what do you want to know? Like movie stuff about me, or?
So I have all kinds of questions about the movies and everything, but just where are you from? What's your business?
Okay, well, I live in Columbia, South Carolina. I've lived in South Carolina forever. I've been doing movies in South Carolina since probably like 95, my own films. And, I work, run some festivals. I'm married. I have 6 dogs. I'm obsessed with.
Well, we're going to talk about a lot of that. So you mentioned you're a filmmaker. How did you know that was what you wanted to do?
I don't know if I knew that I wanted to be a filmmaker. I just, ever since I was a kid, my mom used to, babysit like my, cousins and things like that. This is like back when I was in, elementary school and things like that. And so we would always get together and I would direct these plays that we would record on like a tape recorder. It was like I got a tape recorder for Christmas one year. And so I used to always, record stupid stuff, and we would get together and, do reenactments of, Mommy Dearest and things like that when I was a kid. So, back then I knew I was going to be a queen. I was obsessed with that movie. And so we would all get together and act out the scenes and take turns beating each other. And it was just, I was always, directing these stupid little shows that just kind of developed over the years. And, when I got my first camcorder, I would do, little shorts and things like that. And so I initially thought I wanted to be an actor, got like little parts on little shows and things like that. Then I realized once I was on the set, once I was working, that I prefer to be behind the camera, do the more creative part of it, like the writing and the editing and things like that.
What was your first real film project? So not just kind of recording reenactments of Mommy Dearest, although I love that. I'm pretty sure that needs to happen again. What was your first real I'm a filmmaker now project?
I went to film school at University of South Carolina. I was, this was back when you actually shot on film, 16 millimeter film. Before DSLRs and everything like that. The class was split up into 2 groups, and then we would our final project was, we get to do our own short 16 millimeter film. So that was kind of my first experience working with it. So what I decided to do while I was in the school, I was like, screw, shooting a short film. I want to go and shoot a feature film. So when school was out for the summer, I signed up for a summer course. You have to do an independent study, pretty much come up with something you want to do. If it gets approved, you get credit for it. And so I'm like, I'm going to shoot a feature film on 16 millimeter with all my friends in the summer. And it got approved. And so that was my first feature film. It was called Crinoline Head. while I was in school, I had access to use all the school's equipment for free. You know, my friends worked on it for free. Yeah, of course, I had to buy film stock, which was super expensive, and, you know, get the process and things like that. But that was back in 95, so that turned out to be my very first film. It was my take on, you know, kind of a parody of slasher films, but it was done completely serious. And, you know, if you watch it now, it looks totally 80s, because, you know, it's shot on film. It has that gritty look to it, kind of like, you know, the original Sleepaway Camp, things like that. Back then, there was no internet. So it was like, you shoot a film, you make a copy on VHS, and you mail a copy to Fangoria, you mail a copy to Film Threat, you know, to try to get distribution or try to get reviews. And luckily, that tape got into the hands of someone at Fangoria, and they did like a huge spread on it. I was flipping out. That was it for me. That was like the holy grail, being in Fangoria in color, my first project ever. I'm still in school, and so that was it. And so I felt legit at that point. From there, I was hooked. I did another feature, like within 2 years, called Generation X. After that film, I was kind of burnt out because of how much it cost and the process, and then I just kind of took a break for a while. But I did continue working in film and things like that, because while I was doing this, I worked as like a production assistant on lots of TV movies or, you know, feature films. Like right before I shot Gremlin Head, I was working on Die Hard with a Vengeance, which was shot in South Carolina, not too far from where I was going to school. And so I used a lot of experience I got working on these big films to plan shooting my own. So that's why, you know, I got real prepared and did kind of what I needed to do, what I didn't need to do.
And tell me about your newest project. So your next feature is going to be called A Nun's Curse. What is that film about? What inspired it?
A Nun's Curse. It's about these 4 travelers. They find themselves stranded and they're forced to seek shelter in this old abandoned jail that has a pretty cool backstory of this nun named Sister Monday that was once, she worked there or was kind of stationed there, kind of like assigned there from her convent to comfort the prisoners and things like that. But the only thing is that she was suspected of killing a lot of the prisoners that were there. You know, they would turn up dead. And before she could ever be officially questioned about this, she disappeared. And so now it's present day, and there's this whole, you know, urban legend about her, and these kids go to the prison to kind of seek out the truth about her. And it's a really cool story. It's 2 sisters in it, like rival sisters, like a Jan and a Marsha, and the whole backstory with them. There's a lot of character-based horn in this. It stars Felissa Rose as the nun, Sister Monday. It also stars Erica Edwards. She's actually the lead, the younger of the 2 sisters. She was in my last film, Family Possessions. And it also stars Damien Maffei, who played in the new Strangers movie as the man in the mask, and Gunnar Willis, who was in my film Dollface. So we got like a great cast. I'm really excited about it. The location that we're shooting at is crazy, super old, super historic. Yeah, I'm really excited. We're going to start production in October.
Very cool. And you mentioned that Felissa Rose is going to be Sister Monday. Mm-hmm. I love Felissa Rose. Sleepaway Camp is still my favorite horror movie ever.
Right.
You also worked with her on a previous film, Family Possessions, that we'll talk about a little later. What's it like working with Felissa? What's your favorite Felissa story?
Oh, my God.
Because she gets crazy, so...
There's so many. I mean, it's like my favorite stories don't even have anything to do with us shooting the movie. It's just like us hanging out at, you know, horror conventions and things like that. I mean, what you usually see in person, I try to see is all the time. So, like, when we're working, I'm usually completely stressed out and, you know, trying to make sure everything gets done. And she's just always, you know, got tons of energy and like, what are we doing next? We originally met at that Days of the Dead convention in Atlanta. I was there promoting my film Dollface, and we had a booth. And next to me was Jonathan Kirstein, I don't know if I pronounced his name right, from Sleepaway Camp, and next to him was Felissa. I was just like, oh my God, I'm obsessed with Felissa. I've got to go. You know, I finally, you know, got the nerve up when I talked to her. So I just wanted to say hi. I'm over here promoting my movie. And she was just like we've known each other forever. And she's like, oh, I want to see it. So she came over and like watched the trailer and was like, oh my God, this looks so great. You know, what'd you shoot on? Was asking me all this stuff. And I was like, yeah, it'd be awesome if we got to work together one day. So she, you know, signed some stuff, and we literally kept in touch after that forever. And then like within a year, I was like, okay, I've got this new movie and I would love for you to be in it. And she was like, yes, you know, I'm going to do it. I mean, it was literally just like that easy. And so we've been, you know, friends ever since.
She is so much fun. I just adore her.
She's the best. I mean, I love just to hang out with her, much less, you know, working with her.
What would you say are the biggest challenges and the biggest rewards of working independently?
Well, the biggest challenge, you know, is trying to get everything in order and, you know, pre-plan, you know, because like right now I'm still going through a lot of pre-production, getting my film together. And what I find difficult or challenging is I like to do everything myself because I know it'll get done and I know it'll get done like I want. But like when I start giving people other jobs, you just kind of have to trust them. Being independent, the more you can do yourself, the more your vision will be the final thing you see on the screen. Besides writing and directing my own films, I'm also a cinematographer. So I shoot everything myself as well. So I kind of do a lot of the jobs that a lot of filmmakers depend on other people to do, which costs a lot more money as well. And then also, you're kind of at their disposal, so to speak. That's one of the biggest challenges. But once it's all said and done, one of the biggest rewards is, again, what you're seeing on the screen is your final vision, everything that I wanted. I've got friends that have, partners and things like that when they get into films, and once it's over, they hate each other. I've always tell people, I'm like, if you're going to do something, just try to do as much as you can yourself. Don't get partners. I know that sounds horrible, but if you have a vision and, you have a film you want to do, just go out and do it yourself. It sucks, you have no one to blame but yourself. But, once it's done, this was your vision and it's just like you want it. And so that's my biggest reward, is being able to do as much as I can myself.
Why do you think it's important to have queer voices and queer perspectives in independent film?
Because it's like me growing up, I'm looking at Fangoria magazine and things like that. It would have been cool to know, other filmmakers that were gay, but you're thinking, can I actually do this when I grow up? You grow up watching these horror films and it's always naked females and things like that. For once, I wanted some equal opportunity here growing up. In the horror world now, there's so much diversity out there. If you go to a horror convention, you see everything. You see drag queens, shockingly. You see straight people, you see gay people, you see everything you can imagine. It's like a whole subculture of different people that come together, and they're all there because they just like horror. I don't even know if it's that important now, just because of the conventions and the whole thing. People have to I wish there were more, gay horror filmmakers. I wish there were more women horror. I think they just enjoy the fact that there's, independent horror. It's pretty much the only genre where you can have these types of conventions. You don't see these great drama movie conventions or comedy movie conventions. Horror is pretty much the only type of genre where you can actually even make a feature without having names in your film, because people want to be scared. That's the star of the movie, is the horror. It's pretty unique.
Let's talk a little bit about the business side of independent film. You recently ran a very successful Indiegogo campaign. You met your initial goal, and then you met your stretch goal. What advice do you have for people who want to make their own films, but they might not be sure how to work the money side of it?
Sure. This is the third campaign I've ever done. I hate doing them because you feel like you're out just, please, reminding people about your movie and things like that. But, you have to get in the mindset where if you're not going to talk about your film, nobody else is going to do it for you. The one thing a lot of people, and I see a lot of people do campaigns because they really don't plan. They just kind of type up a campaign, throw up a couple of photos and expect people to start throwing money at them, and it doesn't work that way. You really have to kind of prepare, make a really good video so that people can see what your vision is, get some really cool and unique perks. You want to make them feel like they're going to be a part of the film that you're making. So you tell people just pre-order a DVD, but having some really unique perks associated with that, putting people's names in the credits and things like that will really help you. But they also want to make sure that the film's going to be completed, that you're not just going to take the money and not ever finish it. I've donated tons of campaigns where I've never seen the films, done. So, backing that up with stuff you've done before, there's tons and tons of factors, which basically boils down to just having a really good campaign prepared before you launch it. Having my past film, showing people, this was my last film, these people were in it, it came out, it was distributed by Sony, things like that. So they know it's a legit, quote unquote, legit filmmaker, and that this is going to be something that's done when I say it's going to be done. And that's pretty much the most important thing. And then, of course, making sure that once you do have a campaign, that once it's done, you can actually meet all your perks. A lot of people will say, you raise $10,000 and they're like, all right, we have $10,000 to shoot a movie. But, it's like, well, take away 10% of that, from fees, and then you probably take away another third of that to put away so you can make sure you get people their perks and mail them their perks. It's not always as much as you think it is. So you just kind of have to plan ahead and be prepared. Myself, when I do them, I always kind of do it as a supplement to my budget, because I always go into a film saying, regardless if I raise a dime or not, this film's going to be done. So this will supplement that, and it'll get people involved with the movie, and it'll just help offset a lot of the production costs that come after the fact.
And you do a lot of something that I've noticed with family possessions. which seems like a really smart way to help money and things go further. I saw a couple of eBay auctions where you were selling costumes that were signed from the movie. Mm-hmm. So once you were done with the items, kind of working that in and turning it into a collectible and saying, hey, here's how you can have a piece of this movie. So you purchase a costume and then you turn it into something that then generates a little bit of income on the end.
Right. Honestly, it's not a ton of money, but it's like I was telling Bobby, my partner, I would rather a horror fan that actually would have this displayed in their house or something. I'd rather them have it than it be in a closet of mine somewhere. When we shot Family Possessions and like Felissa had this waitress up and I got her to sign it. And then like when Mark got killed, I got her to sign his shirt. So just a couple of the key props that I knew I would have that would probably mean a lot to a horror fan. And they would probably, mount it and take care of it, rather than me just have it stuffed in a box somewhere. And then, make a little bit of money from it that you can put into your next project. Whatever I make from one project, I just turn around and put it into the next project because I do this as a passion about making films. I don't do it to make a living at it because I have a separate job, that pays the bills, quote unquote. If my film, makes money and I can sell things from the film for my next project, that's what I'm going to do. Mark, he hadn't been in a horror film since Nightmare on Elm Street 2. So when he was in my film and he got killed, I kept his shirt. It's got blood on it. I'm like, this is Mark's original shirt, what he got killed in. First time he's been on screen in a horror film since Nightmare 2. And I actually still have that. So I haven't sold that yet. So that's something I'll probably put up on auction.
When you mentioned your partner, Rob, you and Rob produce the films together. How does it work to have that kind of overlap between your personal and, even if it's not your full-time jobs, but your work life?
We've been together, this will be 9 years. And when we originally met, I had done 2 features and worked on a lot of films, but I really wasn't doing anything in the horror film genre when we got together. And then he kind of slowly learned about, my other films and things. He's like, well, why did you ever stop? You should get back into it. And I'm like, you just don't know the work that's involved with it. Everyone just thinks, you grab a camera and you run out in the woods and scream. And so, he kind of kept pushing me to get back into it. It's funny, we were on an episode of House Hunters because we got this cabin in Gatlinburg. And after we were on it and he was kind of really interested in production and things like that, I decided to shoot a short called The Cabin. And we actually shot it at the cabin that we were on the show for. And that was kind of the first thing we did. It was literally me and him and the 2 actors, and that was it. And so I was just kind of teaching him, letting him see what kind of all went into making a film. I was teaching him audio because that's what he does now for me. He actually records all my audio. And after we did it, we shot it in a weekend and he was excited about it. And after, we did this film, I was like, okay, I think I'm ready to tackle my next feature. And so we did Dollface. It was titled something else. It was called Dorchester's Revenge, but it came out as Dollface. And so that was kind of our first time working on a feature together. And we kind of bumped heads a little bit. Again, this was new for him. So like when I would be directing a scene or telling the actor, this is what I want you to do, blah, 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 he would say, kind of speak up and be like, oh, I don't think you should do that. I think you should do it this way. And I was just like, you don't do that, especially in front of my cast, because they're going to look to you instead of looking to me. And so we would have little fights and things like that. But after that film, and he kind of saw the process and the outcome, and he kind of realized I have a vision and that it's going to go this way. Otherwise, we're going to bump heads. He just kind of realized just kind of step back and let me go in with my vision. And so Family Possessions went great. Anything we did another short called Anniversary this year. It was fun. It's just like getting used to working with somebody, now it's pretty much great. We run the festivals together, our film festivals. It did have its challenges at first, but now it's great because we both know how each other work.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about the Crimson Screen Horror Film Festival. How long have you been doing that? How did it come about?
We're going into our 6th year. It actually came about after I had done my short film called The Cabin. Went all over the States, going to different film festivals because it would get into a lot of these horror festivals. I couldn't get into any festivals in South Carolina where I live because all these mainstream festivals just kind of turned their nose down to horror. I was just annoyed at the fact that I was, winning awards for the film and getting in all these great festivals, but I couldn't get it played in my own state. So I just kind of told Rob, I've always wanted to do a horror festival, so maybe I should take the plunge and try it. We, set up our first year, I think it was 2014 is when we started, and in Charleston, and it just has grown every year since then. We have, films from all over the world. People come from all over the world. We've got these really cool trophies that Tony Rosen designed for us. If you don't know, he's a special effects artist. He's the guy that created the Annabelle doll and did all the effects in The Conjuring and things like that. We had this great award, and we got, all these really great opportunities for filmmakers. We got a sponsor, Shorts TV. They're the largest short film distributor on the planet. They show all the, Oscar-winning short films on their cable channel. So they sponsored our fest, and after a couple of years, they let us know that we're the only horror festival they sponsor now because they were just so happy with the results they get from all the films because they pretty much watch all the films that are submitted to us and offer, broadcast deals to these filmmakers, even if they don't, get in or, win an award. So that's like a great opportunity for anybody. But the festival, this past year was the first year we sold out like all of our tickets 2 months before the festival even came. Every year we have like an icon that we bring in. This year we had Mark Patton come in, and he does like a Q&A on all of his films and things like that. And last year we had Joe Bob Briggs, and before that we had Felissa. The filmmakers are the star of this festival. It's not like a horror convention. You got a lot of horror conventions, and there's stuff, they show films, which is great. But, the people are there to see the celebrities and the vendors. So when they come to Crimson, the people are there to see the horror films. And so we bring a guest in as kind of, a special treat for the filmmakers and the attendees, but not to overshadow the actual filmmakers, because we just want to make sure that they're treated like stars, and they are.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more about a couple of the films, and for any listeners, this is where we're going to get a little bit spoilery. So I wanted to ask you about your last feature, Family Possessions. One thing as I was watching it that I thought was really interesting is that on the one hand, it's a slasher movie. So you've got all these people who are being killed off by this unknown person, but there's also this strong supernatural element. And you don't really understand the connection between the two elements until the movie's over. So I'm wondering, how did that come about? Was it part of the plan from the beginning, or did it evolve naturally as you were working on the film?
I've had the title of the story since, like 97, 98, after I did my film Generation X. The title came to me first, and I thought that'd be a great title, for a film, and I kind of wrote a story around it. It's evolved over the years. Slasher films are my favorite. I love them. So no matter what genre of horror I do, I always have slasher elements, whether it be in the kills or the characters, But I really love, the whole paranormal feel of the film, and that was kind of my goal. We've got this great, crazy, backstory and this creepy dead witch of a grandmother. I wanted to kind of mix both of those elements together. It brings a little comic relief to it as well when you have like the slasher type kills. But just coming up with the story when I was writing it, once I figured out the way I wanted to kill everyone in relation to why, with the star and the five senses and things like that. It kind of started from there, and then I wrote the story around that. When you're working with limited budgets and you're trying to do a paranormal film, you don't want it to come across too hokey. And so I had a lot of the paranormal activity type situations be something that could actually be explained. If you're in a house and you hear something creaking and things like that, it could be, oh, it's just a house settling, or it could be something else. I like the really subtle paranormal things that can happen in the film like that. And I just kind of mixed that in with the slasher kills. I think it wrapped up really well at the end, and a lot of people were expecting it, especially the last scene with the nose and things like that. A few times we've been at screenings where everyone claps at that part. That was kind of something weird. But yeah, I was really happy with it.
Oh, and I love that the lead actress,
Leah Wiseman.
She has this great moment where, they've kind of solved the one piece of it, and then she's like, well, some of that shit that was happening, that wasn't that thing, that was something else. And then you get kind of this whammy twist at the end that I thought was really fun.
I love cliffhanger endings. I love the endings where it's like, oh, there's going to be another. I mean, I've always been a huge fan of that. My films all end that way too, which I really love. But yeah, Leah's great. She was in my film Dollface. She had a smaller role in it, but like when we were shooting and when I was editing things, I was just like, she's so good. She's just so natural and easy. So I just knew I was going to cast her in the next film. Just pretty much how I cast all my films. I like to work with people and see how they are, and usually if I get a good repertoire of actors, I keep them and I keep reusing them. So she was really good.
Now that film also features Mark Patton. We've talked about him a little bit. And he's probably best known for playing Jesse in Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. And he's sort of the first example, and one of the only examples, there's not that many, of a male final girl character. And so there's a lot of kind of talk about that film and the sort of mixed gender that happened with that, and a lot of the homoerotic stuff that was going on in that film. Did you watch Nightmare on Elm Street 2 while you were younger?
Oh, yeah. Of course, yeah. When I saw it in the theater, I remember seeing it, and I was actually talking with Mark about it. And I was like, I didn't see any of the gayness. I was in middle school when it came out, but I didn't see that. I just saw it, because I was obsessed with horror films, and I was just like, I just wanted to be it. I was like, oh my God, it would have been so cool to be in this movie. Of course, when you get older, you see it, but I didn't see it at all then. And I was gay, so you'd think I would. I really wanted him in my film because, working at the coffee house, I wanted to be a gay guy, and I wanted to be someone that was really gay in real life and then have this connection. And so I have a lot of little Easter eggs in the film that are kind of throwback to the Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Mark's great. I was excited to get him in the film.
Well, in Nightmare on Elm Street 2, there's a lot of homoerotic stuff, and I only saw it as an adult, so I kind of picked up on all of that. So it's interesting to hear your perspective when you saw it when you were much younger. Mm-hmm. And that film is kind of polarizing to fans sometimes in terms of how it fits in with the whole franchise. Do you think, this is where I put on my like English major, we like to pick everything apart and ruin everything hat. Do you think that in terms of queer representation that was an important movie?
I mean, looking back now, I do. I mean, just on the fact that in all horror movies, it's like there's always a final girl. There's never been a final guy. So this is kind of like the first time, that happened. I mean, now there's just classes and there's pieces. And there's like a guy that's doing like a documentary on Nightmare on Elm Street 2 that's a professor. So many perspectives on the film and how it relates to gay movies and horror movies in general. It's been dissected so many times and things, and over the year, I just think at the time the guy that wrote it was just being a dick, trying to be funny. I know a lot of the stuff that was in the film, like you see where his door says "No chicks allowed," and there's like a game in his closet that says "Probe," and a lot of the stuff us looking at, we just laugh now, but back then, this was in the early 80s, it was almost, I can see where people was like, the guys just being super homophobic about the whole thing. But it was hidden so well, you wouldn't think anything about it unless you were looking for it. And the last place you would look for something like that is in a horror movie, or especially a Freddy Krueger movie. So, there's a lot of takes on it. Mark, of course, now loves it, and everybody, embraces it now. Whereas back when it came out, it's kind of like, I didn't like that. That was the worst movie of the franchise, and for other reasons other than the gay thing. But I think it's probably one of the most talked about, or probably the most talked about of the whole series for that reason alone. The whole hidden gay undertones of it.
Now, once again, I'm going to get a little spoilery with your movies. So again, if anybody's listening and wants to pause and go watch the movies themselves. But one thing that I thought was interesting is that there's a certain amount of body horror that pops up in your film. The killer in Family Possessions is harvesting different body parts. And there's a lot of scenes that are very, explicit about harvesting these different body parts that become part of this ritual later. In Dollface, there's a character who hits another girl in the face with her used tampon. And then later she ends up squatting onto a butcher knife. And at one point, another character doesn't realize that she's been stabbed because there's been this kind of moment of revealing that she's on her period. So he's just like, oh, clean it up. And what is it about those elements of body horror that you find interesting, or what about body horror is important to the work that you present?
And Dollface, which is a sequel to my film Krillin Head, the whole point of the killings was just trying to do stuff that was over the top, stuff that you hadn't seen before. My original in the Krillin Head, the first one, like one girl gets killed by getting, drowned in a toilet full of shit, and another guy gets killed with celery. I mean, there was all these different, one girl got killed in a New Kids on the Block sleeping bag. There was just all this different weird ways people got killed. And so when I did Dollface, I was like, okay, I got to think of some really, creative things, but it's also funny. When I was doing Family Possessions, of course, the whole background of the killings was each killing had to represent one of the 5 senses. So, of course, it's going to be body parts, smell, the nose, touch the hand, things like that. And plus, it's so slasher anyway to do that. Everyone can't just get stabbed or have their heads cut off. There's got to be a reasoning behind it. That's where I was coming from when I did it. In my film Generation X, which was more kind of like a Heather's black comedy type of movie, the killings were more just somebody getting shot, someone getting stabbed, things like that. But with these slasher films, you just got to be over the top. You've got to have body parts. That's what says horror to me. That's where I was coming from with the body horror. When you're working in low budgets, it's easier to do stuff like that. You want to have body parts.
And speaking of Dollface, so in that film, you've got a young boy who's surrounded by dolls. His mother's a doll maker. And then there's this trauma, and he becomes a serial killer whose crimes and his persona are sort of tied up with the dolls. What are the gender politics of that movie? So walk me through. Is this a film about broken masculinity that leads to dysfunction? Is it about toxic masculinity? Like, what's the kind of gender statement going on in that film?
When I originally did this film, it literally started with a Kremlin skirt, and I just built the story around it. People can come up with their own theories, and I'm like, sure, that's what it means. But honestly, when I was in high school, my stepsister was a clogger. I don't know if you know what that is.
I do.
She was on a clogging team. Well, she had a Kremlin skirt that she wore under her outfit, to flare her dress out. Back when I got my first camcorder, I'm like, oh, we should make a horror movie. What can we do? And I saw that skirt, and I just literally grabbed it and put this on your head. You're going to be Kremlin head. You know, like it was kind of like Pumpkinhead was out back then. So I said, you're going to be Kremlin head. And we just made this dumb film of this person running around with a skirt on their head, and that was just killing people. Years later, you know, when I'm in film school and I'm like, I want to do my own horror movie, I'm like, what can I do? And that stuck with me. And so I said, I'm just going to build a story around the title still, Kremlin Head, and this skirt, which I still had. That actual skirt was used in the film. And I just kind of, you know, built my own Jason Voorhees story or Michael Myers story around the skirt. I'm like, what could it be? And I'm like, okay, you know, the mother, it's always something with the mother, Psycho or, you know, Jason's mom. I'm like, okay. And so I came up with the fact that she was a doll maker and she was super possessive. You know, the son was stuck with his mother all the time. And so when she died, of course, he didn't want to leave her side. And so he ended up eating her. And that's how it became crazy. And that's how the first film was. You know, 20 years later, when I did Dollface and I'm doing the sequel, I was like, now I've got an opportunity to do a flashback to show this instead of just talking about it. Of course, you add, you know, more layers and more elements. You have this crazy mother and you have this young son that is super guarded by her. And so, of course, you know, like maybe he's gay, maybe he's not gay. Why is he obsessed with dolls? You know, is it because of his mom? Or there's all these layers that I don't answer, but you can, you know, pretty much figure out for yourself. And then, of course, he turns out to be this huge beast of a bear, like monster killer in Dollface. And honestly, just, you know, started out as just, there's always a backstory of the killer. Why do they do what they do? And it always, you know, points back to the parents. So the fact that, you know, he likes the dolls and he kept the dolls, that could be a whole nother story.
I did love that in the flashback scene, you had this willowy, very thin, delicate framed boy playing Dorchester. And then as an adult, he's just like a brick shithouse.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because like in the first film, you know, the killer, the Kremlin Head is just, you know, one of the guys in school. And he was kind of a bigger guy, but now he went from that to this massive beast. And, you know, the kid that played the flashback, that's the kid that plays the son in Family Possessions too.
Yeah. He's
just grown like 3 feet, you know, in 2 years. It's ridiculous.
I also love that there were 2 drag queens in Dollface. I always love when a sister gets a cameo. Tell me about how did that come about?
That was actually, you know, when I did Dollface, I was trying to, again, put in Easter eggs that was throwbacks to the original film. So a lot of people have never seen the first film, but the ones that did, I'm like, they'll appreciate this. But in the first film, you know, there's always a scene in a horror film where the kids are going to the woods or they're going wherever, and there's always somebody that's like, don't go there, you know, you'll regret it, that type of thing. You know, like the guy from Friday the 13th. It's got a death curse. In my first film, Kremlin Head, I had this part where all the kids were, you know, driving down the road and they see what they think is a woman walking down the road and they pull over to see if she needs help. And of course, it turns out to be this, you know, drunk, you know, Frankenfurter reject. And it's just like, oh, hi. And, it, you know, they obviously realize, oh, you know, this is somebody that needs help. Having the drag queens was just a throwback to that. But they just had the long, you know, more part of the film. Everyone loves them. They end up being like the best part of the movie. And people are just like, oh my God, you should just do just the movie with just the drag queens. That was my favorite part because they were so funny, you know, while we're shooting it. And they're actual performers, like Ava and Vega are both performers in Charleston. So when I asked them to be in it, they were just like, oh yeah, funny. Well,
and of course that leads to the next question, which is after you're done with The Nun's Curse, what's the star vehicle that you're going to be writing for your favorite drag queen, Miss Janessa J. Champagne?
I don't know. I would love to do another Dollface movie and have it be set, you know, like at a drag camp or something. Since RuPaul's so big now that there's like a drag camp where people can send their kids to, you know, to be drag queens for the summer. I would love to do something like that. I mean, I'm not even thinking about anything after this until we're done, but that's kind of always been a fun idea.
All right. Well, I'll wait for scripts to come my way.
Okay. I'd love to get Alyssa Edwards in it too. That'd be awesome. She's my favorite.
She can be second bill, but just remind her who's the star of that movie.
Right. You can like teach her how to contour.
That's right. So now you've mentioned a couple, but now besides me, who are some of your favorite drag performers?
Alyssa Edwards is my absolute favorite. I love her. She's just hilarious. I love Felissa, I love Alaska, all of the ones on RuPaul, like, you know, I like them all. There's just certain ones that stand out. It's because, like, in the new season, I just haven't been able to fall in love with one, or there's, like, one that just stands out anymore to me. I don't know if it's just me or I'm getting spoiled. I was telling Robbie, like, there's no one like a Sharon Needles or an Alaska, or anyone that stands out to me now. But Alyssa Edwards is, like, my all-time favorite. I love her. She's my favorite.
So do you like the pageant girls? Is that kind of your thing?
No, I just like the ones that are just over the top, you know, because she's such a goofball. I mean, I guess she's a pageant, you know, girl, her House of Edwards and all that. It's just that her, like, her expressions and just the way she talks and she's just a goofball to me. That's why I like her. That's why I like Alaska. Raven, I love Raven. And Aja is mainly just because of their comedy, because they're such smart asses, and I love it. I'm not really into the pageant and the scoring on it. I just like kind of the over the top crazy drag queens, you know?
Yeah.
Ones that could be killers.
Yeah, exactly. Ones that could be build underneath me in your next feature.
Right. Yeah.
Underneath me. That's the key part that you need to take away. So if you have a piece of paper,
I always hear you say that, underneath you, all the time.
Me, yes. So I met you at Days of the Dead in Atlanta, 2017, in between taking 10,000 pictures with Stranger Things kids, because that was insanity.
I know, right?
Oh my God, that was nuts. So you said you do a lot of conventions. What are some of the conventions that you go to?
Days of the Dead, obviously, because they have one in Atlanta and Charlotte, and that's close to me. But that was kind of one of the first ones that I did. The other ones that I usually go to are like, they have a festival and they may be showing like a film of mine. But like I've done Spooky Empire, which is pretty big, in Orlando, and Mad Monster, which is another big festival outside in Charlotte as well. I've done, in Texas, we've done San Antonio. They have a horrific film festival, which we played at, but I actually haven't done a ton of festivals. I want to go to more once we get done with the film. I like to go as a fan, but I also wanted to go to kind of promote the movies and things like that. But I definitely want to do Texas Frightmare. I've never been there. I want to do Flashback again. I've only done 2 of the Days of the Dead. I haven't done Chicago. There's Minneapolis. And there's one more. Where is that?
Louisville.
I can't remember where it is. Louisville, yeah. But those are the main ones. I've always wanted to do the big one in New Jersey that's been around like forever, like back before there were even horror film festivals. What is that large one in New Jersey called?
Is that the one that's like a combined rock and roll and horror?
It's like everything. I can't think of what it's called, but it's been around like since the early days, like before Fangoria. Fangoria used to do a convention even. I can't think of what it's called, and I don't have my computer on so I can Google it. But yeah, I want to do more, once the film's done, so I can get, Family Possessions out, and I kind of can, have copies of Dollface and Family Possessions and my older film, and I can kind of promote NUN'S CURSE too. Anywhere that Felissa goes, definitely want to go and get a table next to her because we always have such a good time.
Yeah, and you were actually inducted. I almost said indicted. That's not the word that I want.
No one knows about that.
You were inducted into the Days of the Dead Hall of Fame in Charlotte this year with Heather Langenkamp from the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Mm-hmm. Just tell me what that was like, getting that sort of recognition as someone who not only contributes to the genre, but also really helps out other creators and helps contribute to fan culture.
Yeah, that was crazy. I had no idea because literally that convention in Charlotte was the weekend before our big film festival in Charleston, Crimson Screen. And so I was so wrapped up in planning and getting ready for that, just going to come down to the convention for like a day just so I could see people and support some of my friends that had film showing. But then Jason said, "Oh, by the way, we're going to induct you to the Hall of Fame." I was like, it just like blew me away. And then he said a lot of really nice things. And I was, super thankful and humbled. I just didn't know how to act. But having Heather there just kind of numbed it all for me. So it really didn't sink in until after. Nightmare on Elm Street was like the first VHS film that I ever owned, and I paid like $80 for it back, when tapes were super expensive. And so I was just like fanboying out, just, being able to, talk to her about that. So it's not just about being a filmmaker and doing horror, but, helping out others, like I do at the festival and things like that. And it made me feel really good. So I was, totally teary-eyed, but not really. But yeah, I was. But it was really cool.
All right. So that's all the questions that I have. Is there anything else you want our Janessa After Dark listeners to know about you?
I'm a little bit sick right now, so I've been coughing my head off. But other than that, just check out NUN'S CURSE on Facebook if you want to kind of follow and keep up with production. And my company's got Horse Creek Productions, and if you wanted to follow us on Facebook as well. That's pretty much it. Hope to get this movie done, to see you guys out at some horror conventions, take some more photos with you, see some of your outfits, and crash your hotel room, at 3 a.m. again.
Yeah, that was a mess. Oh, that's a story for another day. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Tommy. Don't forget that you'll be able to hear a little bit more of his interview in some outtakes that I've saved for a very special Sloppy Seconds episode. That episode will be coming out after episode number 3 and will also feature outtakes from Heidi Moore's interview from episode 1, as well as outtakes from my interview with mystery guest from episode 3. Now, before I end this episode, I do want to take just a moment to let you know about a new limited series podcast that's going to be coming from Champagne Dreams Productions called Miss Jaye, The Renovation. This is going to be a limited series of probably a little bit more than a dozen episodes where yours truly, in the pursuit of my best life, decides to set aside my cynicism for a moment and explore the advice and platitudes of the self-help section. There's some laughter, there's some tears, but will there be lasting transformation? To find out, just listen to Miss Jaye, The Renovation, coming soon from Champagne Dreams Productions. And just like Janessa After Dark, it will be available on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher. This episode of Janessa After Dark includes royalty-free music from bensound.com. Included in this episode are the tracks Actionable, which serves as our podcast intro, the song Downtown, which played on either side of Tommy Faircloth's interview, and the track Sexy, which you're listening to now. For these and more great royalty-free tracks, check out bensound, that's BEN sound.com. Janessa After Dark is written and directed by Chris M. Stoner and is a Champagne Dreams production.